Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity. It's so great to be here. People from a lot of different part of my life I've seen already this morning, so it's really great to reconnect with people and meet new people, see room in the Inn faces, people who have been faithful to serve our guests, and in a lot of different ways. I can imagine that you all have a little bit of a story about how Idlewild is touching the lives of our guests. I'm going to start from the beginning, which goes about 14 years back. I was a chaplain at St. Jude, serving a tiny congregation in East Memphis. A lot of weeks, we didn't have many more people than are in this room come for Sunday school, and then not many more for worship. We had a big building, very few people, no money, but big hearts. And so we started trying to find ways that we could be more active in the community, and outreach things started to be lifted up. How can we do something that is not just sitting here in this building, not just coming to worship on Sunday or the occasional fellowship meal? We had already started a day camp in the summer for low-income families. So in the summer, that big old building was full of activity. We had youth groups that came to help us run those camps, and so there were youth groups living there all summer, one at a time, 1 week at a time. There were children from the neighborhood, from all over that Colonial Acres neighborhood in the building all summer. And then after the first year, our session was meeting, and the question was, well, that was great, now what? The building's empty again, and it's just sitting here. So after a few of those meetings of trying to talk about who we were and what part of life in the congregation we were living together, I said very nonchalantly, well, I know about this model in in Nashville, that shelters people in their churches. And I had met Father Charlie Strobel, the founder of Room in the Inn in Nashville. Years before that, we had maintained a connection through the years, and I had spent a couple of full days at Room in the Inn, but that was years ago, and another part of life and another experience. But I just very casually said that to them, and one of the people in that room would not let go of it, kept asking me questions. So what would that look like? So a seminary student was attending worship with us and part of our fellowship during that time, and he kind of latched on to this man who kept asking those questions, so it got louder. The questions got bigger and louder. So I just said to Leo, well, go to Nashville and come back and tell me what you think. And so on his way back from Nashville, he said, let's find a place to do this. And Colonial was the only place that we thought people might say yes. So we had an after-church potluck and did some slides on a screen and talked about what it would look like, and we expected that the guy that we had been talking to, Leo, and I would have to answer a lot of really hard questions, and people would not be very excited. Not one person said anything that was negative about the idea, and they were ready to go. By the end of that meeting, they were talking about what kind of mattresses they were going to buy and how many nights they could pull this off and how that might look and who needed to be there. And they were, by the end of the month, they had a schedule for meals. It was pretty crazy. It was really, for me, I didn't know at the time, but it was really a picture of what Room in the Inn was going to be like for me for the entire time. Me just holding on to the back of the train that was going, and it still feels like that today. But this congregation just stepped out in faith without any resources and started bringing people from downtown. One of the things that we did early when we started talking about hospitality and doing things that were outside of the church was we started going downtown to a food sharing ministry that happens to be run by my husband. And so we had gotten to know some people. So that first winter really mattered to the congregation. And we knew a few of the people and had established some friendships, some hospitality in the parking lot. And we invited a few of those people that we had come to know to come back on Tuesday nights, every Tuesday night from November to March, and sleep in our church. And that was the beginning. And we thought that that's what we would do, and it would be our outreach. We had no vision that it would be anything bigger than that. It changed us. It changed who we were. It changed how we talked to each other. It changed how we welcomed people into our own homes. It changed how we saw ourselves as a congregation, and ultimately changed my life in the craziest of ways. So the first 3 years, only Colonial doing this every Tuesday night during the winter, during the coldest months of the year. We immediately saw that the people that were coming to us and that we were prioritizing when we were welcoming them to come to East-Memphis from downtown, a lot of them were ill, very sick, frail, not what we expected when we first started thinking about doing something that was a homeless ministry. So we started prioritizing those people that we felt like were having a really hard time and needed a break from the street. But that experience of hospitality continued to grow. The end of the third year, on the last night and at the last Tuesday of March, I left downtown from St. Jude to get back to the church because everybody wanted to be there the last night. It's the last night. We're not going to do this again till November. It had become such a part of who we were that last night was like saying goodbye to friends. It was like, having a vacation with people for months and then breaking up to go to your own place. There were 5 other congregations represented in the volunteer group that night. And so as I went around to thank people for helping, bringing dinner or doing laundry or helping to set up or just being there to share hospitality with the guests, I realized we had a lot more volunteers than we had guests there that night, but everybody wanted to be there the last night. We had volunteers from Germantown Methodist Church. We had volunteers from Trinity Methodist. There were people there from Disciples of Christ Church, from a Lutheran church, and it was just amazing that so many different people had, by word of mouth, just come to see what crazy thing we were doing. And I began to ask people, do you think that your church would do this? Lois Young was at Trinity, and she was also a friend of mine from St. Jude, and so Lois and I had lunch, and she said, I don't know why my church couldn't do this. So Trinity Methodist, not far from here, became one of our first congregations. Peace Lutheran on Jackson, not far from here, because my sister was the pastor, and she couldn't say no. Tinier church than mine was, said yes, and began to host every Friday night. So that was the beginning, and we still were not sure what was happening, but it didn't take long to realize that it was much bigger than us. And so I went back to Nashville and sat in Charlie Strobel's office, and I said, I don't know what's happening, but something's happening, and I think that I have to listen and react to it. So he said, well, get a group of people together, and I'll come to Memphis, and we'll figure out if this is something. You remember David Letterman used to have, is this anything? Is this something or nothing? That's what we were doing. Is this something or is it nothing? And in the parking lot after that meeting, I walked to the car with Charlie, and he said, Lisa, don't do this unless you're going to do this the rest of your life. And I was like, okay, that settles it. I love my job. I'm not doing this the rest of my life. But somehow, God works in ways that I don't understand, and I have never done work that I loved more than what I'm doing now. So that was the beginning for us. Small group of churches, 4 or 5 congregations, exploring what this would look like. Before COVID, we had 55 congregations that were doing Room in the Inn. At least one time a month, a lot of them one time a week, some of them twice a month, some of them working together to make it happen. And so the growth was pretty rapid and pretty organic and pretty amazing. What I love most about Room in the Inn is that it brings together people who believe that hospitality is what we're called to do. We just don't know what that looks like. And sometimes it looks like something that's pretty radical, and that's what Room in the Inn gives people a chance to experience. Presbyterians and Episcopalians and Lutherans and Baptists and two Jewish synagogues, and just any denomination that you can think of, Unitarians, anybody that you can think of that has a place where they gather to express their faith, kind of caught hold of this hospitality bug that was birthed out of this crazy meeting. So we began to grow. We began to grow in congregations and numbers, but we're seeing those people who were coming to us who were not well. If you've hosted here, if you've been here when our guests come here, you've seen them too. You see them at your meals also. There are people that should not be on the street, that have had surgeries, that have chronic illnesses, that are recovering that are in cancer treatment. And so we were seeing more and more of that, and our board started talking very early. In fact, somebody brought to my attention a while back that the very first board minutes, I said, we need to talk about people who are sick. I was in a hospital every day. It was impossible for me not to think about people who were trying to get well, who were in that environment and trying to survive. So we started talking about recuperative care center at early, but still trying just to navigate what this hospitality ministry was going to look like in Memphis. So I'm going to stop talking for a minute, and maybe 3 minutes, and show you a video of what happened next. And then I'll give you a little bit of background about how this happened, because it's a crazy story too. Play. Can we turn it up? That's better. don't know what to do to that next. So that just gives you a picture of where we are today. This is our, not Batesville, Mississippi. Just close it. Yeah. No.
No, that didn't work.
Okay, go ahead and open it back up.
What's that?
Open the computer back up.
It's much more exciting than my video was. Now we've all gotten interested in what's happening in Batesville. It's at 409 Air Street. So we were going strong, congregational shelter, sometimes sheltering 100 people a night, and men, women, sometimes families. We started seeing a few more families. That was the second gap that we identified. The first was medically fragile folks who were on the street with nowhere to go, and families. So we started seeing more families. When we had a strategic plan that was 5 to 10 years, and it included opening a recuperative care center and some sort of family shelter that was more permanent, not night to night, place to place. Then COVID happened. 2 weeks before the season was over in March of 2020, everything shut down. And so our staff, our tiny little staff, went home, and we were still a seasonal shelter program, but we had added summer. So we had some time in between the end of our season and the summer season. But we did end up at home for a few days thinking, well, like everybody else, well, we'll do some puzzles and we'll get back to work. When it became evident that things were not going to go quickly, I got a call from Paul Young, who is the director of Community and Housing and Community Development, and asking if I could be on a call every morning at 9 o'clock to talk about what was happening with homeless people who needed to be off the street and where they were going to go. So there was a group of us that every morning at 9 o'clock met with Paul, and we started saying we can't just do this as a committee. We need to figure out who's going to do what. So very casually, just like in that first session meeting, very casually, I said, well, I have this desire to explore a recuperative care model, and I want to do a pilot anyway. So Room in the Inn will handle hospital discharges. I tend to think things through after I say it's okay. And but that made possible what came after that. So we began to triage people who were coming out of the hospitals. We were getting calls every day, and there were 3 of us taking those calls, putting them into a spreadsheet, figuring out where they were going to be at the hotel that was provided for people. And then the calls started coming for families. So I got the call, can you triage those families? Hospitality Hub's taking women. They have single women. The men are all going to Union Mission or Calvary Mission. So if you can do the hospital discharges in families, well, that sounded manageable. And then that exploded, of course. Thank you.
I'm not sure, because there's no sound input in there anymore, so I don't know why it was humming. I just turned it off. Sorry, guys.
Things happen. Well, thank you for your perseverance. And if I need to talk louder now, I can too. So all of that was going on, and we were trying to, fill our niche in the crisis, and just more and more and more. And you can imagine hospitals needed to make space for people who had COVID, and so the first people out the door were people without insurance. And so we started taking those people to a hotel and doing the minimal of case management for them, trying to figure out what's going on, what their medical condition is, who their medical providers are, and realized that this was something. And So a couple of months into this experience, I got a call from Paul about 8 o'clock at night, and he said, I'm on my way home, and I couldn't wait till tomorrow to ask you this. What do you need to keep doing this? This is obviously a gap in services for people in Memphis. And I said, well, we need a building, and we don't have any money, and we don't have a staff, and we certainly are not in a position to do a capital campaign in the middle of a pandemic. And he said, you figure out the place and let me worry about the rest. And so the next conversation was, do you know of a building? And I said, yes, I've been stalking this Collins Chapel Hospital building for 3 years. I'd looked in every window. I kept thinking I was going to get arrested. And then I thought there was a time, because the bishop wouldn't answer my texts or my emails or anything. The CME church owns the property. And of course it was COVID, and he was, even before COVID, he's a busy man. And so I just was looking at every inch of that property that I could see. And I said, well, I can't get anybody to talk to me about it. And then he said, if I can get a meeting, will you come? And I said, yes. And then we had a meeting, and the bishop was excited, and I was excited, and I was like, this is amazing. And then I remembered that we had a board. And I was like, oh, wait, I can't say yes to this. So we went into that building with our mask on, and you saw pictures on the video of what it looked like before the renovations. The building had been sitting empty for 20 years. It's a beautiful story. Collins Chapel Connectional Hospital, owned by the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church, and it was created to serve African Americans when there was no place for them to go. There was no welcome for them at any hospital. After the Civil War, if something was gushing blood, you could go to an ER, but you never got admitted if you were African American. So 2 doctors who had gone up north to be trained, one of them a medical doctor, one a dentist, brothers, came back to Memphis. Nothing had changed here. They came back to serve the people that were like them, and started a hospital in the basement of their church, literally. Collins Chapel CME Church is across from the back of juvenile court. If you turn on Washington, headed toward the hospitality hub, it's right on the right, and there's a historical marker, and it mentions the hospital. But the hospital is at 409 Ayers, because after they opened up in the basement, things exploded. And you can imagine, if you're the only game in town, you're going to start having a lot of opportunities to serve people. So they grew and they grew. Someone donated some rooming houses that faced west on the back of the property at Ayers, and they had a full-service hospital there. They were doing everything. A lot of prominent Memphians were born in that hospital. People stopped by once a week to talk about being born. I was born here, or my father died here. Do you mind if I walk around to where the room is, where my mother died? I remember when we were sitting there with her when she died. So much history in that building. We talk about all the time, we talk about being on sacred ground every day we go to work. So that hospital building has 2 floors. The bottom floor has the recuperative care center in it. It has 14 rooms and 21 beds. We've not doubled up yet post-COVID, but we're getting close to being ready to do that so that we can serve up to 21. We have people that come to us from every hospital in town. If you mention a medical provider in the city, I can tell you someone who has come from that medical provider into our recuperative care center if they're homeless. We have people who've had amputations 2 days before and come to us because there's no physical therapy if you don't have insurance. So most of the people that come to us have no insurance and no income. So we're starting from 0 when they get to us. The number of people that leave us and go into permanent housing is a miracle. I wish that it was a much higher number, but just the fact that any of them are leaving us and going into housing is a miracle. Sometimes people come to us and they've been in the hospital for months because there's nowhere for them to go. And we realized that in all of that time that they were in the hospital, not one person started the process of applying for disability. Double amputees come to us without one person having started that process or applying for insurance. So we've made relationships with social workers and case managers in hospitals so that we start that on the front end. If they have somebody that they think they're going to refer to us, then let's get that started, because a medical doctor has to sign off on that before they leave the hospital. So once they get to us, we're already way behind the process. So that's a recuperative care center. Right now we have a gentleman who is in cancer treatment, someone that I know from 14 years ago, on the street, has been chronically homeless for all of those years and lived on the street. He couldn't start his lung cancer chemotherapy unless he had a place to live. There was no place for him to live. He wasn't going to have a place to live, but the recuperative care center was perfect for him. So he is now safe and in a clean environment with 3 meals a day. And then a woman who came to us who lived her entire life in Collierville. She was in Methodist Germantown for 3 months because there was no place for her to go. She has dementia. Once her husband built the house that they lived in their entire lives, raised their children there. Once she started having memory problems and dementia issues, she signed over everything to her family. She went into the hospital, and while she was in the hospital, everything disappeared. There was nowhere for her to go to. There was no money for her to go into a care facility. So she is just everybody's grandma at the recuperative care center and in the whole building. She has dementia, and now we are working on conservatorship and working with Germantown Methodist, who is very, very helpful with legal services for her. But she would have nowhere to be, and she had no family that was stepping up to help. She doesn't remember my name every day, but she remembers my dog's name. So as long as I bring him, she's happy. So recuperative care center, we have 2 social workers that are there full-time and 24-hour staff. Upstairs is a little bit more energetic because sometimes we have up to 60 children living upstairs. We have 14 rooms for families. We have families of all sizes come to us. We have a family with 1 baby who is 6 months old who came from Haiti as refugees with no place to live in Memphis. And so during that process, they had nowhere. And so he's 6 months old, and then we have a 17-year-old there right now. So big gap. Right now, school is out, so it's very happening over there. Lots of noise and fun and activities. And we have a summer day camp for school-aged children during that time. So those are the services that are happening. Upstairs, same as downstairs. The Family Inn has 2 social workers that work all day long trying to help these people navigate services and make it from this permanent emergency shelter situation into housing. I have some numbers if I can find them. I can never remember them though. So since we've been in the building, we've served 286 families, and that is about 1,000 individuals, and over 700 of those are children. That number was probably through April, so lots more since then too. So that number just grows and grows and grows. We had over 150 children that we served in congregational shelter. Goodness knows that Idlewild saw their share of those. And I'll tell you, just the inside scoop on that is that there are some places that are just more open to the ripping and roaring of a lot of children, and Idlewild is one of those, and has never said no to us. Probably the next morning, there were afterthoughts. But there have been so many children who have slept in this building who would have been in their cars or on back porches or under bridges, literally, if they had not been in your building. So that's the main part of this hospitality story, is what you're doing, because that's the only way it works. People go from our congregational night-to-night shelter program into Family Inn, into housing very often. And it starts with you. It starts with that ability to be off the street, to have enough breathing time to think about the next minute. And that starts here many nights. So I'm supposed to give you enough time for questions. You're going to wave your hands when I have to stop talking.
We have plenty of time.
Yay. This is my favorite part so that I can tell you what you really want to know.
Would you describe the process that happens before the van pulls up here
Yes.
Thursday nights?
Yes. It's exciting too. So when I first started 14 years ago, I just pulled up in a parking lot downtown after work and gave out these little tiny yellow tickets. And then a week ahead, yeah. So and just in the parking lot, and then the van would come and pick them up. And that was literally how it worked. Then, of course, people got to know who we were. We only saw men at first. It didn't take long till women started trusting us, and so then we were overwhelmed with the number of women that were coming. So we moved then up to First Methodist. They then offered us the use of a building. I saw Steve on the way in, and we had his architectural service talk to us about that building once, and we all laughed when it was over. It was a horrid building, but it was our home for several years. It got us to where we needed to be. And then we would gather them there. So the guests know what time to come. We don't have a billboard. We don't send out notices. We really are amazed sometimes. They know our calendar better than we do because we do have the calendar on our website. This one guy says he stops by the library every day to look up the calendar to see what the schedule is and which churches are hosting. So we gather them. We do orientation, and we usually start that about a month ahead of the season.
And now the horrible building is not what you
Yeah, so we're at First Presbyterian right now. Yes, we gather them in their courtyard and then inside the fellowship hall. So there's a registration that happens, there's an orientation that happens, and then there's hospitality. Chaotic hospitality is what I call it, which is what I like best. So people gather there. We very rarely have enough space for everyone. So it's not first come, first serve, because big people will always be first. Aggressive people will always be first. So everyone goes on a list, and if we have more people than we have spaces, which we almost always do, it's a random drawing. Women and children go on the list first. So. Yeah, so just a random drawing. Random, literally the app on my phone, that's what it's called. And we take turns. I just pass it around and let the guests do it a lot of times, so that everybody knows we're doing it fairly. No one ever argues when they leave. They're thankful that they have another chance the next night.
What time do you start gathering?
We have people come in at 4:30. If we have new people come, we'll register them between 4 and 4:30. So we will let people come in who are new, and we'll sit with them and do registration. And then at 4:30, everybody can come in and sign in. So women and children first on the list. Yeah.
If you drive by at 3, you'll see people.
Oh yes, they're there. You won't have to wonder where Room in the Inn is picking up. Yeah.
So women and children first, and then women.
That's right. Single women with children prioritized, then single women, then men. We have 2 large men's shelters in town, so that's why our priority list.
Well, when I got involved, I was told everything starts with MIFA. If they kind of certify whatever, that this person needs the services.
No, the only relationship that we have with MIFA is that we receive their family referrals. They were our only family referrals the first 2 years. This past year, that all changed, and they are no longer our only referral source. So the only relationship we have with them is that they do family rapid rehousing. Yeah.
Do you know anything about Hospitality Hub?
Sure. We
How does it
talk to them every day. We talk to them every day. So Hospitality Hub is a resource-based hospitality center on Washington. People go there for birth certificates, for IDs. They have a 35-bed women's shelter there. Room in the Inn, our board was planning a women's shelter, and when we heard that the hub was going to open a women's shelter, that's when we shifted to families, because we don't want to duplicate what somebody else is doing. That's ridiculous. So they have a women's shelter there. They have a lot of resources that are there on their campus too. Mm-hmm.
Lisa, what percentage roughly, of the family need across the city is being met?
It's a drop in the bucket, I'll tell you. So I've been to 2 meetings at City Hall in the last 2 months. Memphis Shelby County School reported 2,491 children were homeless last year. Those were children that self-reported or families that self-reported. So we know that there were a lot more than that. So if there are almost 3,000 children and going to school who are homeless, you can just, in your imagination, come up with an incredible number that is the actual number. So there are probably 4,000, 4,500 children who are homeless in Memphis. So there are 14 rooms at Room in the Inn. The Hospitality Hub generally has 1 or 2 families that they're housing there because it's an emergency. We do Room in the Inn. We are almost always only doing families, especially this summer. We haven't been able to shelter single women maybe half a dozen times. So it's the biggest crisis I've seen since I've been doing this. And we all know it is, and so we're trying to start talking to each other about it. What can we do? How can we? So Room in the Inn is planning. There are discussions about having a large shelter for families. I have expressed that I think that's a horrible idea. It's not what's best for children to be in a huge environment. We have 14 families that stay on our campus. I would not ever have more than that. They have a community that they are able to be part of. Their children are safe because of the numbers. So we think that our model, that if we can convince congregations to join us, we are working right now with St. Vincent de Paul. The upstairs of the soup kitchen building, St. Vincent de Paul on Monroe, is set up for Room in the Inn. They renovated just for Room in the Inn. And there are Catholic churches that have been using that space. And so we are talking to them about making that a night-to-night family shelter, so that families stay in the same place night to night. They're all in one location, so that frees up space in other congregations for us to be able to shelter more.
For
Does
now,
that make sense?
meeting more the need is dependent on congregation.
Yes, yes. We still have, a dozen congregations who did not come back after COVID. We have congregations who dabble in Room in the Inn, so they'll help congregations that are well established at hosting, and instead of starting their own. So it's lots of experience, lots of talking, lots of sharing your experience with people that that go to other churches. So it really is about just growing that network more. Yes.
We had, I'm Michael Peeler, and I'm actually the treasurer for Presbytery, and the people here may or may not be aware, but at the last Presbytery meeting, there was an appeal to the 38 coming maybe the last Thursday of the month, or last day of the month, whatever it is. But anyway, trying to appeal to other congregations within our presbytery to be a part of it. So just so that you're aware of that.
That's great, and that makes a difference. Once people see that it can be overwhelming in your head until you see it in person. It's not rocket science. It's not, it takes a lot of energy.
Well, and before we hosted here, we actually shared
Mm-hmm.
or used Calvary's
That's right.
once a month
So they held
to
on.
experience it and to see what it is before we took it over here.
It makes a lot of difference. Our church, our building, had at one time 8 congregations that was using it. We sold that building during COVID, but Christ the King Lutheran does the same thing. Several congregations use their space. Calvary, of course. Germantown Methodist has about 8 different congregations using their space. And seems like there's one more, but lots of different opportunities. So if your friend says, well, we could never do that in our church, somebody has a space you can do it in. Yeah. When I first started, I had an excuseless conversation. No matter what people said to me, I was like, well, I can take care of that. Well, we don't have the money to buy the mattresses, and I was like, well, I'll go to Regional 1 and ask them for mattresses, which I did at least once a month. And don't throw those away. And so all of the original congregations had hospital mattresses from Regional 1 and Methodist.
We started out with Baptist sheets you gave me.
Absolutely, yes. So the Baptist
T-shirt feeling ones.
Yes.
You've got a lot of good volunteers in here.
It's great.
I'm looking around, I was like, you pulled in a sweet crowd.
Well, I recognize a lot of faces, so thank you for coming and for the support, because that congregational shelter and that hospitality mission will always be the core of Room in the Inn. That's who we are. Welcoming people into your own space, there is nothing like that. There is nothing that feels like that. When we first started, the food sharing ministry that I mentioned started out of a group of people that worshiped in our living room. And that experience, I feel like everything grew out of that experience of the risk and uncomfortableness that I had to say yes to my husband when he said, could we just have everybody here on Monday night? And so a lot of nights I would be late at the hospital and walk in the middle of people in my living room who felt at home there, who felt at home enough to come in whether I was there or not, and hang around on the porch afterwards. So there is nothing that feels like welcoming somebody into your own space. So when we talk about sharing, I always say, well, share with this group for a while, and then you might decide that you can do it at your own place, which has happened to several churches. Germantown Presbyterian is literally across the street from the building that shared at first at Germantown Methodist, but they started feeling like that. More of our congregation will be involved if we're in our own building. And so they went across the street and started hosting at their building. Beth Shalom felt the same way. We have a kosher kitchen. The guests can't bring anything in. That sounds ridiculous, but we know that the people in our congregation will respond better to bringing people into our building than to going somewhere else. So I think there's just magic in that.
Can the people that utilize Room in the Inn have a place each day of the week?
When we're doing the night-to-night shelter, which is congregational shelter, we do that 10 months a year, 7 nights a week. This summer, because we don't have enough congregations, if you went to our website and looked at the calendar, it would, it's rough. We don't have any congregations on the weekend at all, and we go days without having congregations. So it's been rough this summer.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? That was actually my question. So what are your organization's biggest needs right now? It sounds like you need more host congregations.
We do. We need host congregations to fill this gap in the city. And like I said, we could warehouse families in big buildings, but I believe that this model of small groups of people, welcoming small groups of people, and having relationships and offering that hospitality is what is life-changing to the people that we serve. So the more of that happens, the ripple effect of change is incredible. At this meeting, so congregations, that's what we need. We need more spaces. We need more nights on that calendar. At this meeting with the city, the end of the last one, City Councilman Warrens went around the room and asked each organization that was represented one question. What do you do when a family calls you and you don't have room? And he pointed them out by name, and every one of them said, we send them to room in the inn. So what that meant to me is that we are the last resort. We're it. We're the bottom. If we don't have space for people, that's it. There is the bus station, the uncle that you should not be spending the night with, all of those things come to my mind when we don't have enough room.
How long do people usually use room in the inn houses?
We have the Brad Winchesters. I just said I took that picture of Brad during pickup one night. We have the Brad Winchesters of Room in the Inn who started coming 14 years ago and come until they die. And we have people who are with us for a week or 2 weeks, or we're better now at helping them to move to a different place, helping them to have some resolutions. But there are people that I've seen for a decade. There's not a limit on how many times you can stay. The only limitation is how many people are helping us serve those people.
Yeah, I just have one time.
Okay.
Thinking about young adults, still serving adults, do you have connections to like job corps for those individuals?
We do. We are always connecting. That's the great thing about Memphis. Somebody does everything, and you don't have to do everything. I don't have to do everything. Somebody else will do that. So a lot of times, this coming winter season in November, we plan to have case managers at pickup for the first time. So we're going to see how that goes, and I think that'll be the next step of how we can get people to the right place.